The storm outside mirrored the storm inside her chest. Thunder rolled in the distance, but the real lightning was in Sarah Carter's heart. She stood in the middle of his shining office, her hands trembling as she clutched the test results that should have changed everything. Her lips quivered, her voice nearly breaking as she whispered, "Edward, this is your child." But the man before her didn't move. Edward Kane, a billionaire CEO known for his ruthless business empire, leaned back against his polished mahogany desk. His suit was immaculate, his silver watch gleaming under the dim light. He looked like the portrait of success, yet his eyes, sharp, icy, unfeeling, cut through her hope like a blade. For a moment, silence ruled the room. She prayed he would step forward, take her hand, whisper something human, but then came the words that shattered her. "I built my empire by eliminating weaknesses," he said coldly, his lips curling. "And you, this child, is nothing but a mistake." The words struck her harder than any blow could have. Her chest rose and fell with sharp breaths, her throat burning as tears threatened. She forced herself not to cry, not to give him the satisfaction. Still, the echo of mistake tore through her, repeating in her ears. She had once believed in this man, believed in his whispered promises during late nights, believed in the warmth of his arms. But now all she saw was a stranger, a man who had traded love for power, compassion for control. With trembling steps, she turned toward the door. Her palm pressed against her stomach, a silent vow forming in her heart. He may deny us. He may erase us from his world. But I will not. I will carry this child. I will fight for this child. And one day, he will see what he threw away. As the door closed behind her, Edward didn't look back. His reflection in the glass skyscraper window remained still, powerful, untouched. But Sarah walked into the unknown, broken yet determined. She didn't know how she would survive, only that she must, for the life growing inside her. That night, in her tiny one-room apartment far from the glittering towers of the city, Sarah whispered into the darkness, her hands cradling her stomach, "You are not a mistake. You are my miracle." Her tears fell, but with them came strength, because she knew this was the beginning of a battle, and she was ready to fight. The nights were the hardest. When the city outside quieted, and the only sound in her small apartment was the ticking of the clock and the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. Sarah often sat by the window, watching the blur of headlights pass below, her hand resting over her growing belly. Fear pressed heavily on her, but so did resolve. She had left behind the world of luxury and security, and now every day was a fight to keep food on the table and hope alive in her heart. Her job at the diner left her exhausted, her feet aching, her body sore, but each time she felt the soft kick from inside her, she reminded herself why she endured. She whispered promises into the silence, promises that her child would never feel unwanted, never feel like a mistake. The bills piled up, the loneliness was sharp, and there were nights when she broke down, tears soaking into the thin fabric of her pillow. Yet even in those moments of weakness, something inside her refused to let go. She would rise the next morning, tie back her hair, and face another day because quitting wasn't an option. Strangers never knew her struggle. To them she was just another tired waitress, but behind her weary smile lived a story of courage no one could see. Each challenge, each sacrifice, was laying the foundation for a future she refused to stop believing in. And deep within her heart, a small but unshakable voice whispered that someday everything would change. Years passed in a blur of long shifts, scraped knees, and small victories that no one else noticed, but Sarah cherished as treasures. Her son, Daniel, grew into a boy with golden hair and bright, curious eyes that mirrored the man who had once denied his existence. Every time she looked at him, her heart tightened with a mix of pride and quiet sorrow, but she never let her child see the pain. To Daniel she was unbreakable, the mother who always smiled, even when her hands ached from working double shifts. She celebrated his first steps in their cramped apartment, clapped proudly at his school recitals even if she had to run straight from work, and tucked him into bed with stories she made up to hide the truth of their past. Yet as Daniel grew older, his questions grew sharper. "Mom, why don't I have a dad like the other kids?" His voice had the innocence of childhood, but it cut into her like glass. She would pause, swallowing the ache in her throat, and answer gently, "Because sometimes the people who are supposed to stay don't. But you have me, and I'll always be enough." And though he nodded, his eyes lingered on her face with a quiet searching. Sarah knew she couldn't shield him from the truth forever, and a part of her feared the day he would discover the man who had cast them aside. Still, she poured her soul into raising him, unaware that fate was already weaving the threads of a future that would bring their worlds crashing together again. The turning point came on a summer afternoon when Sarah was rushing from work to pick Daniel up from a friend's birthday party. She arrived a little late, hair still smelling faintly of coffee and kitchen grease from the diner, and found her son laughing with the other children, his face lit with joy. But as she stood at the edge of the yard, she overheard two mothers whispering, their words sharp as needles. "Such a shame," one said, glancing at Sarah's worn uniform. "The boy looks just like Edward Kane. Everyone knows it, but she'll never admit it." Sarah froze, her breath caught in her chest. It was a truth she had fought to keep hidden, a name she had buried deep. Yet even in silence, the resemblance between Daniel and his father was undeniable, and the world was beginning to notice. That night, when Daniel asked again about his father, there was no evading it. His eyes searched hers, demanding answers, and Sarah's heart broke because she could see the yearning in him. She knelt beside his bed, brushing back his golden hair, and whispered, "Your father chose a different path, one without us. But that doesn't mean you are any less worthy, Daniel. You are my greatest gift, and one day the world will see who you truly are." He held on to her tightly, but she could feel the question lingering in his silence. Sarah lay awake for hours, staring into the darkness, realizing the time was drawing near when their hidden past would collide with the future. What she didn't know was that destiny was preparing to bring her face to face once more with the man who had once called them a mistake. And this time, she would not walk away quietly. Years had strengthened her spirit, but nothing could prepare Sarah for the moment their paths crossed again. It happened not in the shadows of the city where she once hid, but on the open water, beneath a sky painted gold by the setting sun. Daniel had been invited to a school trip that included a tour of the harbor, and though Sarah hesitated, she agreed, thinking it would be nothing more than a day of laughter and sea breeze. But when the sleek white yacht pulled into view, towering like a palace on the waves, her heart slammed in her chest. The name etched across its gleaming side was unmistakable: Kane Enterprises. The children ran ahead, their excitement spilling into the air, while Sarah's steps faltered. And then she saw him. Edward stood on the deck, older now, his once youthful face carved into sharper lines, but his presence was as commanding as ever. For a moment, the years collapsed, and she was back in that cold office, clutching proof of their child in trembling hands. Daniel tugged at her arm, his voice bright. "Mom, that man looks just like me." The words pierced her, her throat tightening as her son unknowingly revealed the truth she had shielded him from all his life. Edward's gaze lifted, and their eyes locked across the distance. She could tell by the sudden stillness in his posture, by the flicker in his icy blue eyes, that he saw what she had fought so hard to protect. This was no chance encounter. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And Sarah realized that the secret she had carried for so long was about to change everything. Edward descended the polished steps of the yacht slowly, as if each movement carried the weight of years he had tried to bury. The crowd of children's laughter faded into the background, replaced by the pounding of Sarah's heart. Daniel, curious and innocent, stepped closer, his golden hair catching the sunlight, his eyes mirroring the man who now stared at him in stunned silence. For the first time, Edward Kane looked vulnerable. His lips parted, but no words came, his gaze shifting between Sarah and the boy who carried his reflection so perfectly it was undeniable. The silence stretched, thick with truths too heavy to ignore. Sarah lifted her chin, no longer the trembling woman who had once walked out of his office shattered. Time and hardship had carved strength into her, and she met his eyes with steady defiance. "This is your son," she said softly, yet her voice carried a power that silenced the sea breeze itself. Edward's hand tightened at his side, the mask of control slipping as emotion flickered across his features. Regret. Shock. Something that looked dangerously close to longing. Daniel blinked up at him, innocent wonder in his gaze, and asked the question Sarah had feared for years. "Are you my father?" The words cracked through Edward's armor, leaving him exposed before everyone. For once, the man who had built an empire on control had none. Sarah's heart raced, knowing the moment she had both dreaded and waited for had finally arrived. The future, uncertain and unstoppable, hovered in the air like the tide about to break. One decision from Edward could shatter them, or change their lives forever.